But the bottom line is there is no record of any pharmaceutical drug that to help mankind that's been developed by gain of function. There's no vaccine that's been developed. And really, it's been all about the risk, but the benefits are not very apparent. But, this was Anthony Fauci's famous quote in the Washington Post in 2011. He said, even if a pandemic occurs, if a scientist is bitten and it gets out from the lab and a pandemic occurs, that the knowledge is worth the benefits.
To August of last year, nobody really knew who I was.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation.
We need to come together as Americans and realize that we have a war at hand here. Right?
Like, dude, how scared of this shit do you have to be to be wearing gloves, a face shield, and mask at this point?
Help us to urge folks and say to them, look, it's time to roll up your sleeve and get the shot.
Chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska, responsible for 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation. Put what I say to the test. Just don't write me off as crazy misinformation.
Doctor, please bring your cell phone.
600,000 people will die of cancer. 300,000 people will die of obesity this year. When is enough enough?
Senator Rand Paul is joining us today. I am so thankful for your time. I have some questions. I'm super excited to be sitting down with you today, Senator. I campaigned for your dad in 2012. I feel like the election was stolen during that time for your father. And, I have some questions for you. One of the questions out of the gate, so many people have said, you need to ask him, what color is his tie?
You would hate it if I pled the fifth on your program, wouldn't you?
Yes.
No, it was the whole thing was, comical in some ways, but really tragic in that the American public deserves answers. And someone will write off, Fauci's mistakes as, oh, these were in the heat of the battle and people were dying and he had to make decisions. But really the biggest and the worst of all of his decisions was the decision to fund gain of function or dangerous research in China. But this wasn't something he did in the heat of the battle. This is something that is a longstanding advocacy of his, really going back to at least 2009, 2010, when he chose to fund an experiment in the Netherlands to mutate the avian flu. The avian flu, or the bird flu, goes bird to bird easily, occasionally goes bird to human, but doesn't go human to human. So he funded an experiment where they did 8 mutations and made the bird flu more transmissible to mammals and through the air. And to my mind, that's very, very dangerous, and a lot of the scientific community agreed with me. So I don't quite think that we can give Fauci a break for making these urgent decisions right in the middle of the pandemic he had to decide. I think he made these decisions from his point of view thoughtfully and slowly over decades, and he's just been wrong. But also his decisions put a lot of us at risk.
Absolutely. I just can't help but think, what is the sole purpose? I mean, I hear you talk about gain of function. I hear this, and I know there's a lot of corruption around this. But to me, it's like, okay, just from a common sense perspective here, this has to be an act of war. I mean, what's the sole purpose of a gain of function besides the whole purpose of inflicting injury on the American people and to create a problem and then funneling the solution? Look what we saw during the HIV. Fauci has patents on the treatments for HIV, and then, he's getting royalties from that treatment protocol. He pushed the problem, he got the people to react, and then funnel the solution. And we saw the same thing with COVID.
I think he would argue that, or people that argue for gain of function, that they're going to create a vaccine and save the world from a disease. They also argue that gain of function, it helps them characterize which animal viruses might eventually adapt and go to humans. But the bottom line is there is no record of any pharmaceutical drug that to help mankind that's been developed by gain of function. There's no vaccine that's been developed. And really, it's been all about the risk, but the benefits are not very apparent. But, this was Anthony Fauci's famous quote in the Washington Post in 2011. He said, even if a pandemic occurs, if a scientist is bitten and it gets out from the lab and a pandemic occurs, that the knowledge is worth the benefits. But there's another scientist by the name of David Relman at Stanford, who I don't know his political affiliation. I don't think he's a partisan. He's been involved with advising government for a decade or more. He says the opposite. He says that the experiment with the avian flu, that the benefits were not worth the risk, that the experiment shouldn't have happened, and that it shouldn't have been published because the publication of it was essentially a roadmap for how to develop these dangerous viruses. Another big advocate of this has been Bill Gates. Now, people say, well, I haven't heard Bill Gates talk about gain of function. That's because he doesn't. Bill Gates has advocated and given a lot of money he wants to identify all the viruses. Some people say there's 6 million viruses, but in order to identify them, you got to go looking for them. So particularly with coronaviruses, what you have to do is dig through a bunch of bat guano 300 feet under the ground in a remote area of China. So the first argument against doing that is that you take a virus that's not interacting with man, you dig it out from 300 feet underground in a cave, and then you take it to Wuhan, a city of 15 million. It's got to be transported over 8 hours. And so people get sick just from the handling of it. People digging down the guano have been sickened by some of these coronaviruses and have died. So there's a question of, is it worth the risk just to dig it up and take it to a big metropolitan area? But it's worse than that. When they say characterize it, they genetically sequence it, but then they say, this is a new virus X that we found in this bat cave. What if we take a piece of this other coronavirus, an S protein, and stick it on the one we found? Wonder if then it would infect humans. And by that they say, well, that's identification, but that's not. That's a gain of function experiment because they've now created a virus that didn't exist in nature, but they qualify or classify this as characterizing or identifying the virus. So a lot of the State Department money over the last decade and Bill Gates money has gone to identifying viruses, but it brings them from remote areas to big cities. And then it also does gain of function experiments on them to see what it takes to get them to infect humans. All very dangerous and shouldn't be happening.
Yep. Senator, I just can't help but think, I mean, you think about all the crimes against humanity that just go on. I mean, Fauci's track record is a mile long here of corruption. I mean, and I appreciate your work and I support you 110% in this, but we have evidence in 2018 to 2020 with Fauci in the so-called Ebola breakouts in the Congo. The 4 drugs that were utilized, remdesivir being one of them. And remdesivir had a shown record of causing harm. I mean, we had renal failure. I mean, the warnings from the NIH and talking about the renal failure, the acute renal failure that in the hospitals during the protocols being pushed here. Fauci had a massive influence on the protocols being pushed. And so I'm begging you, will you subpoena the raw trial data, the hospital adverse events reports, the communications among Fauci's agency, the FDA, the Gilead determined whether Americans were subjected to dangerous government-protected experiments without honest informed consent. So about this protocols being pushed, because how many people suffered a loss due to the faulty protocols influenced by Fauci?
Those are all good questions. I don't have an answer or a short answer. All his communications have been subpoenaed for the most part. Now, whether or not he was communicating always on a government phone or a non-government phone is a question, but we have subpoenaed and looked at the vast majority of his communications. We released a bunch of documents right before this last hearing. Our goal is to release everything eventually. So if there are specific documents of him talking to the FDA that you're concerned with, one, ask us and we'll ask our staff. I mean, like I say, this is millions and millions of pages of documents, but our goal is to release all of it. And as far as conflict of interest, as far as people making money off of any of this or having a monetary reason to make public health decisions, one of the things we've been trying to pass for the last year, and I've gotten to where I have the approval of 99 senators, I lack one Democrat, is mandating that on their financial forms that all government scientists have to list their royalties. In 1984, they passed a law and the scientists got an upper hand and they excluded their royalties. So I think it's crazy. The analogy I make is that if if someone was on the city council and their spouse owned the book company, you can't vote for the book contract for your husband's book company without revealing your conflict of interest. In fact, almost everybody would say you would have to recuse yourself. Well, I don't think you can be on the vaccine committee and mandate that everybody in the country take a Pfizer vaccine or a Moderna vaccine and have gotten royalties from them. You would have to reveal that. Really, you shouldn't vote. Now, Secretary Kennedy's been doing a good job. I see as they vote, he's changed over these committees to better people. But then I see as they vote, I think they announce before each vote, I have no conflict of interest. That's great, but it lasts only as long as Secretary Kennedy lasts. I want to change the law such that if we get unlucky and we get someone who isn't as concerned with public health in that position or a new president, that we have it as a reporting requirement. It's not going to cure the world, but it's at least one thing towards having people reveal conflict of interest. I think I'm going to eventually get that passed. I'm either trying to stick it on legislation or get it passed unanimously and then send it back to the House. But I have one more holdout, and I'm trying to get beyond that hold.
Well, I pray you're successful in those efforts. I just can't help but think of how, gain of function, putting this all together from a 30,000 sky foot view and understanding, how do I say it? The vaccine wasn't created to save us from COVID. It sure seemed like COVID was created to funnel in the vaccine. The problem, reaction, and solution, what we've seen over and over and over in tyrannical governments. And I feel like there needs to be justice here. There needs to be accountability. That's the one thing American people are screaming at the rooftops, and they lost faith in our justice system here because, there's a saying out there: injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And, if we're not successful here with, exposing the crimes against humanity here around this vaccine. I mean, the mRNA vaccine was shown there's more adverse events reported in the VAERS reporting system than in the last 4 years or 5 years in the last 30 years combined. So is there going to be accountability around this vaccine?
Do you think Anthony Fauci's pulmonary embolism is in the VAERS system?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah. No, I think not. I think he did everything possible to cover it up, and probably to this day, won't admit that it had anything to do with the vaccine. But an unusual finding and an unusual coincidence that it happened after he was vaccinated. You're exactly right that we need to make sure this never happens again. I think we've gone a long way towards discrediting the messenger, though, by pointing out how what he was saying privately is different than in public. I think the public is now aware of his hypocrisy and duplicity, frankly. So I think we have gone a long way. This week we will vote on a contempt of Congress. We believe that pleading the fifth when you've been pardoned is not appropriate, that you should still have to comply with a congressional investigation. So we will vote on a contempt violation. I think we'll pass. Unfortunately, it'll probably be partisan, a party line vote. There are a couple of choices. Historically, people send them to to the full Senate and try to get them voted on. I don't think we're going to do that in this case because I don't think we can get any Democrat support on this. So my plan is, if I can win the committee vote, is to send it directly to the Department of Justice as a referral. None of this has a binding force of law. Even if the whole Senate sends it to the DOJ, it doesn't force them to indict. It is a recommendation. It is sending up advice or a recommendation for prosecution. So either way, our committee will send it. And there are other various things that may happen that we may find out about next week. And then we could change our mind too. If the leadership told me they had the votes, we might vote on it in the full Senate. But either way, this week, if I'm successful in the committee, I will send a recommendation that he be prosecuted for contempt of Congress.
Well, I pray that you're successful. Again, I feel like there needs to be justice here. I mean, the reality of this situation is massive, and the American people, again, need to know the truth of what went down and what Fauci is guilty of. And what do you think the likelihood of him being prosecuted? What do you think do you think that's a reality that the American people will see here?
The only possibility of prosecution would be for this contempt, probably, because I think that the pardon will hold. He could be prosecuted for lying, but he's not willing to testify now, so you don't know if he'll lie. He could have testified, though, and he could have admitted to destroying records and then just say, oh, well, I wasn't positive it was against the law. I thought these were communications, not records. And it wouldn't matter because he's then telling the truth that he destroyed the records, but he didn't want to testify that way. On gain of function, he's argued previously, oh, it's not really gain of function according to his understanding of the definition. He argues semantics. So he could have done all of that, but instead he chose to plead the fifth, 111 times. The only other person to plead the fifth more was Carlos Marcello, who was part of the New Orleans crime family and was actually linked to JFK's assassination. So he, I think, will be held in that kind of company. His pardon is identical to only one other person in history, Hunter Biden. His pardon goes back to 2014. You ask, why would he get a 10-year pardon? Well, 2014 is about when the funding begins for the Wuhan lab. So from the inception of the Wuhan lab until Biden leaves the presidency, he gets a pass. He gets a pardon. But I think it appears to try to cover any dealings that he had to do with the Wuhan lab. And he knew from the beginning, in January of 2020, he sends an email to his assistant, and in the subject line, it says gain of function research, and lists the paper from Wuhan. So they were calling it that. EcoHealth has notes back and forth. When they get their funding turned back on, they had some trouble with funding, they get it turned back on, they send a note back to the NIH, thank you for restarting our gain of function research. So, I mean, they were calling it that. Fauci was calling it that. And then in public hearing, he's, oh, well, it's not really gain of function because this technical, this and that. That's why I think in some ways we should call it gain of function and then immediately call it dangerous research. Why were you funding dangerous research, dangerous gain of function research? Because it's important that people know that that's the point, is that this is dangerous to create viruses that don't exist in nature, and then to run them through, grow them in mice that have human cells. These mice have basically human lungs. And so you infect these mice with a respiratory virus, you do it over and over again. It's called serial passage. And what you end up with is you're selecting out for viruses that have a mutation to allow them to affect humans. If you do it enough, you basically can create or pre-adapt a virus to spread. And that's what a lot of people think happened. Alina Chen wrote a great book about this, Viral, with Matt Ridley. And in that book, she makes this point that the reason the virus was so fast was that it was pre-adapted. In 2003, we had a coronavirus that did go from animals to humans, but it never spread very well because it wasn't very well adapted to go human to human. It's the same with the bird flu right now. Bird flu's clunky going human to human, fortunately. But if you work on it in a lab with a bunch of rats with human lungs, I'll bet you in 6 months you can make the avian flu just like COVID, which would be a disaster for the world.
Well, I just think that, again, going back to this whole thing, it's so evil. It's just unnatural, and it should not be allowed. And when you say, he's funding this, it's really, the taxpayers, right? That's ultimately where this money is coming from, is the American people, right?
Yeah. And so right now, the credit to the Trump administration, he did an executive order and there's supposed to be no funding of gain of function. Now, whether that's true or not, I'm still digging into. We think that the government particularly is doing some experiments with monkeypox that are gain of function. They're hiding it from me and from others who want to look into it. And they just classify it and then they hide the ball. So I have another bill called the Risky Research Review Act. This bill would create a presidential commission. While Trump's president, he would do the appointments. They have 5-year terms. He would appoint scientists as well as some national security people, and they would have the ability to look at all experiments anywhere in the government, including classified. Well, some Republicans are trying to block that. Senator Cotton is head of the Intel Committee. He does not want us to be able to look at classified research. And then there wouldn't be any oversight because who knows who's looking at this stuff. So I think you have to look at classified research and you have to look at all the research. They set up a committee in 2016. It was called the P3CO committee. That committee was supposed to look at dangerous research, but they had no ability to go looking. They could only take referrals. So if someone self-referred it to them, they could look at it, but they couldn't say, oh, I see this title here. That looks like you're doing gain of function. Send me your research project and try to prove to me that it's not, and we'll review it. They didn't have the ability to do that. So in like a 4-year period, they only looked at like 4. four different research projects, and there were probably dozens and dozens of gain of function. It's not to the tune of thousands, but at least dozens, of these dangerous things go on. And to this day, we really don't know what's going on in the foreign biolabs. Tulsi Gabbard was good to mention on the way out and to reiterate there's 130 biolabs in 30 countries. The pushback from the establishment is, they're just working on brucellosis and common animal diseases to vaccinate cows and stuff. If that's all it is, fine. Show us all your experiments. But they have not been forthcoming with showing us the experiments that are going on in foreign countries. And we know that Fauci and others have a habit of outsourcing things that maybe they can't do here. You may recall in Tunisia, they were doing an experiment on beagles where they were infecting them with sandflies in their eyes. It was horrific. They would cut the larynx of the dog because the dogs would cry so much. And Fauci was outsourcing it. And then the researchers listed the number for the grant they got. And then later on said, oh, no, we made a mistake. We didn't use any of the U.S. money on that. We used it on another experiment. But I think they're purposely outsourcing things to other countries that have lower standards or don't care about any standards for animals.
It's evil. It's all evil. And so I just want to support you in this. Rand, I'm going to give you the final word here. And I encourage you to I beg you to get a subpoena to look into the protocols that were pushed, because there needs to be justice for the families that lost a loved one. There needs to be justice for service members who lost their career in the military for refusing the vaccine. I myself was a victim of the slanders in the media as well as yourself. This isn't a right versus left issue. This is a fight for good versus evil. But I want to give you the last word for encouragement to the American people that think this is just a dog and pony show, who think that there will not be justice here for Fauci. Give us a word of encouragement how we can support you in this fight.
Well, I would be encouraged that we've brought a lot to light. So the truth is shining, transparency is here. We are exposing this, and it isn't going to be swept under the rug. The American public and the world, frankly, knows about this now. As far as successes, we have never had a rebellion in Washington to a vaccine mandate. They've allowed it in the military. They've gone blithely on, and they have these mandates. For the first time, we did repeal a mandate. So there were people hurt. I had people in the military been in 17 years that were in danger, of being kicked out of the military. But most of those we were able to save, or quite a few of those we were able to save their careers by getting rid of the mandate. That's a positive. On the legislative front, people watching this need to know that they need to call their congressmen and or their senators. And there are two bills that I have. I'm open to more, but there are two that I have right now. One says all scientists have to report their royalties from big pharma. The other one would be a presidential commission. It's called Risky Research Review Act. This would be a presidential commission to put people in place who don't receive grants to oversee grants. Part of the problem now is if they have an oversight board and they put you on it and you get an $8 million grant from Fauci, are you going to be objective on anything that has to do with Fauci? This was the problem. One of the authors got an $8 million grant in April of 2020 after he had changed his private opinion from saying it came from the lab to saying, no, it came from nature. He was rewarded with a big grant. So you can't have people overseeing this who get grants. So our presidential commission purposefully excludes grant takers from being the overseers, but it does get scientists, and once scientists who are able to look at these projects and tell what is dangerous and what isn't, to make sure that we don't exclude stuff that are advances that we should be open to. But I'm encouraged, actually. I think we're in a better position than we've ever been as far as skepticism of consensus, the idea that science is always evolving. Einstein said, I'm one experiment away from being disproven. And also to the idea of risks and benefits, that every individual makes it. You and I might not make exactly the same decision on the risks and benefits. And so we have to discuss what the risks to a vaccine are and what the benefits are. And then frankly, it gets down to the individual to make the decision. And I think if we can get it into that realm that we don't have to automatically accept everything or told from government and everything about vaccines, that we're going to be in a better place. So I'm optimistic, but don't give up the fight.
Amen, brother. Benjamin Rush, a signer of our Declaration of Independence, stated that if we must put medical freedom in the Constitution, because the time will come when medicine will organize into an undercover dictatorship to one class of men, to restrict the art of healing to one class of men. And I believe that time is right now. Senator Rand, I thank you for your generosity of your time today. Thank you for giving me your time. Thank you for standing in the gap and being in the fight. We love you and we support you. People listening, share this as far as you can. Help Senator Rand Paul, support him in this fight. Be encouraged, because Senator Rand, you are doing good things, and and good always wins in the end. So thank you for your time this morning. God bless you.
Thank you.
To August of last year, nobody really knew who I was.
There's about 12 people who are producing 65% of anti-vaccine misinformation.
We need to come together as Americans and realize that we have a war at hand here. Right?
Like, dude, how scared of this shit do you have to be to be wearing gloves, a face shield, and a mask at this point?
Help us to urge folks and say to them, look, it's time to roll up your sleeve and get the shot.
Chiropractor in Omaha, Nebraska, responsible for 65% of the anti-vaccine misinformation. Put what I say to the test. Just don't write me off as crazy misinformation.
Doctor, please bring yourself in order.
600,000 people will die of cancer. 300,000 people will die of obesity this year. When is enough enough?